Everybody knows the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's penchant for South African wine, and specifically the sweet wine Vin de Constance from Constantia. But probably a less told story about Napoleon is that he almost certainly also loved a little bit of nagmaal or communion wine from South Africa that was sourced from the Pieternierskloof. Now, if you're a fan of wine history, then you absolutely have to track down the work of writer Joanne Gibson, who makes a fascinating case for the theory that this nagmaal or communion wine that Napoleon loved so much would have been made from a mix of Grenache, Noir and Cinsault from vines that were planted in 1729. Now, the implication of this is that Grenache Noir has been growing in South Africa for more than 300 years. And to give you context, Cabernet Sauvignon, from which many of South Africa's most iconic red wines are made, has its earliest noted historical evidence as late as 1880, which is almost 150 years after that of Grenache. So in many senses, Grenache Noir should receive the sort of historical reverence that is reserved only for our ancient Muscat, Chenin Blanc and Semillon vineyards. Now we're talking about Grenache Noir because we're in the middle of a series of videos here at Handring Solo that sets about debunking many of the myths around South African wine that are unfortunately often perpetuated by a number of internationally accredited wine course syllabo, more than one syllabus. One of those myths is that Grenache Noir is really a Johnny-come-lately to the South African wine scene. So today's Handring Solo wine of the day, Die Katse Snor Grenache Noir, made by winemaker Gerard Smith, gives us the opportunity to do exactly that. And in case you're wondering, the fruit for this wine comes from the Nabo vineyard, which is in Botriverwine, which is kind of wedged down south. The Botriverwine area in itself is a place that has many stories, which we will hopefully tell in the future. Gerard Smith is the winemaker at Creation Vineyards, which is in the Upper Hemel and Aarde ward. And in one sense, the Katse Snor range is really his chance to colour outside the lines. Because the Martin family who own Creation have a fairly classic wine aesthetic. They are an estate that focuses very tightly on the classic cultivars of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in a region, Hemel and Aarde, which is known globally for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And even the Hemel and Aarde wine community are fairly old worldy in their sense of style. There's plenty of tartan, golf caps, photo shoots with hunting dogs and knee-high leather boots. So Die Katse Snor is a chance for Gerard Smith to express some of his more obviously South African facets. This becomes clear when you look at his wine range. He has a Katse Snor Sauvignon Blanc, Sauvignon being South Africa's most exported cultivar and most locally consumed. Then he has Die Katse Snor Cinsault, and of course Cinsault is not only the cultivar that makes up the oldest red cultivar vineyard in South Africa, but also has probably the highest density of old vines for any red cultivar. Then, of course, there is the Katse Snor Grenache Noir, which we're studying today, and that follows a similar vein as Cinsault with over 300 years of history in the country. But he also does let a little of his day job come into the Die Katse Snor range by producing a Katse Snor Pinot Noir and a Katse Snor Chardonnay. But that's enough about all his other wines. Let's get into this glass and see what Gerard has prepared for us. The name Die Katse Snor is an Afrikaans term which translates directly into the cat's moustache, but probably means something a little closer to the cat's whiskers. Quite a bold claim, but let's see whether the wine lives up to that. Now, when we give it a sniff, well, the nose is a good start. It's really hard to get a more inviting opening than that, because there's this incredible interplay, first of all, between rose petal and cherry candy, but then underneath that, there's a whole another layer of kind of white pepper, which is a slightly more savory side, but then that goes through into raspberries and this even blood orange pith. It's really wild, absolutely superb. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I'd think that perhaps there had been some weird seance work going on in the cellar where Gerard had in fact summoned the spirit of Pinot into this Grenache. And when we give it a sip, well, the first thing that impresses me is the texture. It has the most supreme chalky tannins. Now, people say chalky tannins all the time, and they kind of what they mean is, oh, it's nice tannins instead of raw tannins. But I mean chalky in the most chalkiest chalk sense. I mean, if you think these tannins manage to dry your mouth the way they might do for a rock climber on his hands, but at the same time, they leave everything in your mouth feeling supremely smooth, the way that chalk dust does when it's in between the ridges in your fingers. So it's this fantastic sensation of having been gently dried, the mouth still feels silky and smooth. That is what I mean by chalky tannins. Now, as for the fruit component, as we detected on the aromas, it really is a lovely mix of that cherry element, some raspberry, and the finish has a quite delightful bitter citrus pith. So really those aromas that we detected up front are delivered very faithfully onto the palate. All in all, a superbly tidy wine from Gerard Smith, albeit not overly complex. Okay, so that is all we have time for today. But if you're a fan of platter ratings, then make sure you track down Die Katze Snor Sauvignon Blanc and Die Katze Snor Chardonnay, both of which got platter 4.5 stars. And as for the 300-year history of Grenache Noir in South Africa, I will leave a link to one video that tells you all about that. And then another video which talks about the fascinating region of the Pickenierskloof, which is where allegedly those 1729 Grenache Noir vineyards were planted.